You reach for a book with a cracked spine and a cover that's seen things: airport floors, rainy windowsills, probably even a few therapy sessions by osmosis. It's a memoir, the kind that begins with something gutting, like a parent vanishing, or a childhood spent in silence. You know the type. The ones that wrap trauma in beautiful language, like gift paper around a bruise. You hesitate, because once you open this one, it's going to look back at you hard. You turn the page anyway. The first sentence feels like a confession you weren't supposed to hear. You pause, swallow, read on. These memoirs, the mirror slap kind, don't ask permission. They drag you back to your own first heartbreak, first betrayal, first time you realized adults don't always deserve trust. The author writes about addiction like it is a familiar ex, about shame like it has a smell. You don't know them, but suddenly you do. Their voice lives behind your ribs for a minute. One historical fact presses gently into your awareness. In 1831, Mary Prince became the first black woman to publish a memoir in Britain. The history of Mary Prince and her words shattered polite society's silence around slavery. Just imagine your own pain, bound and printed, making people squirm at dinner parties. Memoirs have always been rebellions in disguise. Somewhere in the margins, a tiny scribble reminds you this book once belonged to someone else. Maybe they needed it more than you do now, or maybe not. Maybe you're exactly the person this book has been waiting for. You keep reading. The narrative swerves from pain to wit, then drops a self-deprecating joke so precise, you laugh softly, like you're trying not to wake someone. The writer admits to crying in public bathrooms, to ghosting therapists, to Googling, "Am I?" The problem? You relate too much. It's unnerving how accurately a stranger can chart your inner landscape. One chapter ends with the line, "I learned how to survive before I learned how to live," and you just sit with that, let it echo. Because same, but here's the trick these books pull. They don't just show scars, they trace the healing. They slip self-compassion in between the lines, like lavender tucked into a pillowcase. They teach you how to language your mess, how to own your narrative without making it neat. And that's where it starts to shift your shoulders, unclench. Your inner monologue gets softer, like it's finally gotten the memo that you're doing your best. Now you're thinking about that time in school, when you were told not to write about yourself. Too self-indulgent, they said, as if journaling your way through collapse is anything but survival. Memoirists have been blamed for oversharing forever. Historians still argue whether early autobiographies were honest accounts or ego in disguise. Either way, you're glad they exist. You flip the page and land on a passage where the author forgives someone you're still angry at in your own life. It's humbling. You feel called out, like a gentle slap with a velvet glove, then quirky. Twist, there's this story about how the writer once spent 3 months living in a yacht in Iceland with a sheep named Donna. It doesn't explain much. It doesn't have to. That's the thing about memoirs. The random becomes sacred. Even the detours matter. Especially the detours. Your eyes flick toward your nightstand, where your own unused journal sits. The guilt is immediate. You keep planning to write your story. But where would you start? Dear Void, I made it through Tuesday. Not exactly Pulitzer material. Still, tonight, after this, maybe you'll try. Because here's what this book does: it reminds you that truth isn't tidy. It stutters, loops, breaks, mid-thought, and that's okay. That's real. You don't need a narrative arc. You just need a beginning. You close the book for a moment, Place your hand on the cover. It's warm, like it's been breathing with you. There's comfort in knowing someone else made it through, that they didn't shrink from their chaos. They mapped it and left the light on for you, and somehow your own story feels a little more valid now, a little less like a mess and more like a draft, unpolished, sure, but worthy. Side, a car passes with a low hum. Your breath sinks with the rhythm of night. You feel slower, quieter. This is what memoirs do when they're good. They make you want to be kind. To others, sure, but mostly, finally, to yourself. You shift under the blanket, thumb resting on the last page. Not quite ready to let go, but you will, you always do. You slide the memoir off your chest, set it aside like something fragile, and reach next for fiction. Not the comforting kind, the kind that leaves splinters. This one opens with a line about a girl walking into the ocean in a red dress. No explanation, no context, just mood and a flood of implication. You love it already, or you fear it, or both, because the best fiction doesn't offer you a mirror it hands. You a new face and dares you to wear it. You sink deeper into the page. Now you're in a world where people lie beautifully and consequences have metaphors. A boy builds a boat from typewriters. A woman grows feathers every time she tells the truth. The plot is chaos, but you're locked in. It's not real, but it rearranges your brain just the same. Fiction has always had that power. Did you know Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1852, is often credited with turning American public opinion against slavery? Abraham Lincoln supposedly called its author Harriet Beecher Stowe the little lady who started this great war. Historians still argue whether he actually said it, but the point stands: fiction has teeth. You chew on a sentence that makes your chest feel hollow. It's not even dramatic, just true. Something about how people don't break, they evaporate. And you sit with that. Look at the ceiling, breathe. A character makes a choice you swore you'd never make. But somehow, the book makes it feel logical. Worse, it makes it feel relatable. That's the trap. Fiction sneaks past your defenses, paints its villains in your shade of grey, then leaves you wondering if you're really the hero of your own life or just narrating over someone else's collapse. Then the fringe trivia creeps in. Franz Kafka insisted his unpublished work be burned after his death. His friend ignored him, which is how we got the Metamorphosis story about a man who wakes up as a cockroach. A lot of people relate to that more than they'd like to admit, especially around tax season. Meanwhile, the story you're reading twists again. A betrayal, a twist, a death. You blink hard and try not to cry over someone who technically doesn't exist. You fail just a little. This is what fiction does best. It gives you the emotional blueprint for situations you may never live through but still need to understand. War, loss, vengeance, impossible love. You walk those roads safely, your heart bruised but intact. At some point you close the book halfway and stare. Not at anything in particular, just stare. Your thoughts keep rolling like movie credits. You're wondering now, what kind of character have you been lately? Not the lead, probably. Maybe comic relief. Maybe the one who disappears in Act 2. And nobody notices until Act 4. Maybe you're just the person holding someone else's spotlight. But fiction reminds you that every side character has a backstory. Even you, especially you. And here's the kicker: you think you're reading for escape, but you're not. You're reading for permission, to feel fully, to make messy choices, to exist in shades and contradictions. Fiction validates your complexity without ever needing to solve it. You remember a line from this book. It said, "Sometimes the most honest things are said by the liars." That sticks with you. It makes you rethink some conversations, maybe even some people. Then there's the thing no one tells you. Fiction helps you practice empathy. Not the performance kind, the quiet, aching kind. The kind that makes you pause before judging. That reminds you the villain has morning breath and anxiety, too. You keep reading. The protagonist begins to unravel in a way you recognize, low, graceful, like a ribbon coming undone. Their epiphany feels eerily like yours. Maybe this isn't coincidence. Maybe this book found you, not the other way around. You glance at the clock. Later than you thought. You don't mind. The story reaches its final page. No tidy ending. No closure. Just a question, hanging like mist. You close the book and exhale. That was fiction, but you're different now. You reach for something older now. The cover's worn, the pages smell like a forgotten attic. It's a philosophy text, or maybe a collection of meditations. Not the flashy kind, no gold-embossed titles or dramatic photos of the author sitting in a power pose. Just muted paper, a name in plain font, and the kind of stillness that hums. You begin reading. The words are deceptively calm. Sentences roll out like they were written by someone who knew how to sit still for more than 6 minutes, a feat you've maybe never achieved in your adult life. The author writes about anger as if it's an illusion, about grief as if it were weather, about joy as if it should be approached with reverence, not urgency. You find yourself reading slower than usual, as if the book might punish you for rushing. It reminds you of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor whose meditations were never meant for publication, just journal entries, real pep talks from a man who ruled an empire and still needed reminding to be patient in traffic. Historians still argue whether he intended to write for posterity or was simply trying to survive himself. Either way, you relate. Hard. You flip another page. Now it's talking about detachment. Not the kind you do after being ghosted, but a higher level, monk-tier distance from desire and ego. You squirm. Detachment sounds noble until you realize it means giving up your obsession with getting the last word in every argument, and then, out of nowhere, the book drops a line that hits like a coffee table to the shin. You will die before you read everything that matters. You blink. Well, that's rude. True, but rude. And now you're panicking about your Goodreads list again. You pause to sip water. You're thirsty, but the book makes even that feel philosophical. You wonder if you're drinking mindfully enough. You're suddenly aware of how noisy your own thoughts are compared to the stillness of this prose, like trying to play drums during a funeral. Then comes a fringe bit of lore during the Tang dynasty. There were entire tea houses where people would gather just to read in silence together. No conversation, no interaction, just synchronized solitude. Imagine trying that today without someone live streaming it for content. Some rituals deserve to be forgotten, but not that one. Back to the book. It's now talking about legacy, about how nothing really lasts, not your job title, not your social media archive, not even your last sarcastic WhatsApp status. And that's okay. You don't need to be permanent to be meaningful. You just need to be present. You look up from the page and realize your room has changed. Not physically, but it feels calmer, like the walls are listening differently now. The air feels thicker with thought. This book has slowed your pulse, untied a knot you didn't realize you were carrying behind your ribs. The author goes on about solitude, not loneliness, but actual chosen solitude as a practice. You think of the last time you were truly alone, without music, without a phone, without 5 tabs open pretending to be productivity. You can't remember, maybe never, and now, here in this moment, you wonder if you could try it. Just once, a full hour of stillness, no stimulation, just breath, light, and the sound of your brain trying to talk over all of it. You're not ready, but this book makes you want to be. Another passage. Silence is not the absence of thought, it is the tuning of thought to a finer frequency. You whisper it aloud, like a spell, and just like that, you hear it differently. The sentence has bones. A philosopher once argued that humans invented stories not to entertain, but to make peace with their own limitations. You wonder if that's why these ancient texts still hold up. They're not telling you what to think. They're reminding you how to think quietly, deeply, without the algorithm steering the wheel. And here's the sneaky magic this book doesn't change your opinion. It changes your orientation. You tilt slightly, and that tilt will matter later. When you react to something with an eyebrow instead of an explosion, you read the final paragraph twice. Once for meaning, once for memory. It doesn't end with a dramatic insight, just a sentence about breath, about how everything begins and ends with it. You set the book down, not with a thud, but a whisper. Your pulse is lower now. Your thoughts feel heavier, but in a grounding kind of way. You're not racing toward sleep, you're falling slowly into it, like a coin sinking through still water. This book didn't shout change at you. It just ... held a mirror at the right angle. Hey guys, tonight we're about to do something that's technically legal, but emotionally risky. Reading. You're lying there in a soft, wrinkled cocoon of sheets, maybe with a leg sticking out for temperature regulation, and you're surrounded, literally or mentally, by books. Books stacked on nightstands, spilling from tote bags, hoarded in carts you never check out. They're all staring at you. They've been waiting, patiently, quietly, like cats. Some of these books have lived more lives than you've imagined. Some are absolute frauds, and some, well, they might quietly unzip your identity and leave it folded at the foot of your bed. You probably won't survive this, at least not as the version of yourself who pressed play. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's make this a global bedtime book club. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through your mental library, a little dazed, a little overwhelmed. You start with the obvious, the towering stack beside your bed. It's got the dramatic spine benders, the ones with titles like Atomic You, The Art of Not Imploding, or How to Be a Whole Person by Thursday. They're always life-changing, always gifted by someone who definitely hasn't read them either. You sigh, flip one open, and just like that, it begins. You learn fast. Books don't whisper, they drag you by the collar. The first few chapters pull your mental threads loose. There's the one that introduces the idea that your comfort zone isn't cozy, it's a padded cell with soft lighting. Another suggests that multitasking is modern self-harm. Then comes the history bomb. In 1455, Gutenberg printed the first mass-market Bible, and people cried from the shock of personal access to knowledge. You, meanwhile, dog-ear a page and spill tea on it. But hey, It's progress. One fringe fact jumps out at you. Monks used to read out loud to themselves in libraries, whispering, alone, like bookish ghosts. Apparently, this was to absorb not just the text, but its vibration. You try it, mutter a sentence or two. You sound like a sleep-deprived wizard. But there's something magical in the repetition. You make it through 5 pages and have already decided to wake up at 5 a.m. tomorrow. Delete all your apps, start journaling, and walk 10,000 steps barefoot. The book says you can become a better person by next Thursday if you just commit to the process. Historians still argue whether anyone's ever actually followed one of these plans to completion that then come the side. Effect suddenly every sentence in every book sounds like it's personally shaming you. A line about procrastination makes you blink like you've been slapped. A metaphor about broken vases makes you wonder if it's talking about your last friendship. You check the cover again. Nope, still just a book. Not an intervention. You switch books. Maybe fiction will be safer. You pick up a novel whose characters probably cry more than you do. It opens with a funeral. Great. Even the made-up people are emotionally ahead of you. Still, something hooks you. Maybe it's the description of a hand-tracing condensation on a train window, or how the protagonist eats toast like it's a love letter. You forget where you are. Your breath slows. Your room, your ceiling. Your entire sense of self begins to dissolve into words and narrative tension. You remember that one corner of your bookshelf, the later pile that's basically exile. The book's too smart, too dense, too real. You pick one up, instantly regret it. It starts mid-thought and references 3 dead philosophers you've never heard of. You squint. You flip to the back for a glossary that doesn't exist. You give up. You're not ready, not tonight, but you're proud of trying. That's what this is about, right? Not changing your life, but shifting it microscopically, page by page, thought by thought. You're not here to become someone else. You're here to finally recognize the quiet truths you've ignored. Books don't change you overnight. They chip away at you gently, like waves smoothing a rockin', lest you read Hemingway, in which case it's more like being stabbed with beauty. Outside, the wind taps the window. Your fingers relax. Your eyes scan slower. The room feels quieter than before, almost holy. And suddenly, you get it. The stack isn't a burden. It's a mirror, a timeline, a map of your unfinished evolutions. That diet book from 2017, Optimistic You, that half-read feminist memoir, woke you in progress. The graphic novel you hide behind a plant, softcore vulnerability. All of it matters, and you'll read them someday. Maybe, probably not. Still, tonight, you read. You feel yourself loosening into the prose, letting the sentences crawl over your ribs, rearrange the tempo of your thoughts. Books stack higher than buildings, deeper than oceans, and right now, you are inside one. Or maybe one is inside you, and that, strangely enough, feels safe. The next book you reach for isn't kind. It doesn't coddle, doesn't hug, doesn't hold your hand and tell you you're already perfect. No, this one glares at you from the cover, probably silently judging your snack choices. You pick it up anyway, because sometimes growth comes from being roasted. This is the kind of book that critiques your whole lifestyle in paragraph 2. It's not subtle. It says things like you think you're tired, but really, you're just spiritually lazy. You wince. Not wrong, but ouch. It's the literary equivalent of your most sarcastic friend doing an intervention with a thesaurus. It's part essay, part manifesto, part personal attack. But you keep going, because it feels necessary, like salt in a wound, painful but honest. The first essay is about attention. It points out, with receipts, how your phone has trained your brain to crave interruptions like sugar. You can't argue with it, especially because you checked your phone twice while reading that sentence. It's a wake-up slap, but you're still here. The author compares modern life to a casino, bright, noisy, full of dopamine and no clocks. You laugh uncomfortably because they're right. You haven't seen your real thoughts in days. You scroll more than you sleep. You tweet more than you speak. You start to wonder if your sense of self is algorithmically curated. This brings to mind a weird historical moment. During the French Revolution, clocks were removed from some town squares to discourage strict schedules, aiming to free people from the tyranny of time. Historians still debate whether this was radical liberation or total chaos. Either way, you sort of wish someone would remove your calendar app. Back to the book. The next chapter is on consumption, not the fun kind. The author argues that you've been taught to fill every emotion with something: food, noise, news, purchases. You bristle, then glance at your cart. 5 tabs open, 0 need. You close them. That's the power of this kind of book. It shames you into action, but not in a cruel way. It's more like, I know you can do better. Stop pretending you don't. It's tough love in Times New Roman. There's a rant about your generation's addiction to branding yourself. You suddenly feel very aware of the filtered version of you online, the curated captions, the clever bio, the ironic emojis that hide real feelings. You remember the part in the book where the author writes, every time you trade honesty for relatability, you're making your soul a little cheaper. Oof, that one's going to echo for a while. Then comes the fringe fact. There's a psychological theory known as the ironic process theory, which basically says the more you try not to think about something, the harder it hits you. So when the book tells you to stop obsessing over how you're perceived, guess what? Now that's all you can think about. You dog-ear the page, out of self-defense. You notice now how aggressive this book's design is: bold fonts, short chapters, lots of white space. It's practically yelling at you in aesthetically pleasing chunks. But it works. Each essay feels like a short slap, followed by a pat on the back. You kind of like it. The author finally softens barely. There's a line about how we all crave validation because we're wired to belong. That even our worst habits often begin with a desire to be loved. You pause. That lands differently, like a cool hand on your overheated forehead. Then another sentence. Self-awareness is a luxury you owe yourself. Use it before the world uses you. It's the kind of line you want to paint on a wall, or whisper into your coffee every morning. Like a mantra with bite. You think about how rare it is to read something that doesn't flatter you, that doesn't worry about your comfort, that just ... tells the truth. You're not offended, you're relieved. Like someone finally told you the thing you suspected all along. You're not broken, you're just distracted. And now you're less. So, the final page dares you to go 5 minutes without performing. No jokes, no curated identity, just breath and stillness. You set the book down, you try. 5 minutes, it's harder than expected. But you make it to 3.5 before your brain pipes up with a comment. About serial.progress. You pull the blanket higher. You're still awake, but lighter. like the fog in your mind has thinned just enough to see yourself a little clearer. Not perfect, not fixed, but honest. This book didn't soothe you. It sharpened you, and somehow that feels like a different kind of comfort. Now you're drawn to the underdog shelf, the forgotten titles, the ones you bought because someone recommended them 3 years ago, and you promised you'd definitely get around to it. Books with no buzz, no Netflix adaptation, no highlight-worthy quotes trending on social media, just quiet spines collecting dust and waiting for the right moment. Like now, you pick one with a nondescript cover maybe, a faded forest scene, or a plain serif title. The author's name doesn't ring a bell. No blurbs from famous people, no international bestseller sticker. You open it without expectations, and that's when the magic happens. It starts slow, unassuming. A story unfolds, gentle, patient, atmospheric. It doesn't pull you by the collar like the loud books. It sits beside you, offers you tea, and begins to hum a story you didn't know you needed. The language is careful, not showy. The kind that doesn't scream to be underlined, but quietly carves a groove in your thoughts. You get 4 pages in before you realize this book understands you better than you understand yourself. You remember a historical gem. In 1811, Jane Austen published Sense and Sensibility anonymously. By a lady, the title page said. Her work was modestly received at first. Now, centuries later, her words are considered foundational literature. Historians still argue whether she wrote for rebellion or romance, but either way, her voice outlived empires. The underdog books carry that same energy. No fanfare, no big launches, just truth. Humble truths, strange truths. Truths that slipped under the radar while the bestsellers strutted by, with neon covers and podcast deals. The book you're reading now, it's about a grieving father building a boat. That's it. No dragons, no affairs, just grief, wood, and water. And somehow, it's the most human thing you've read in weeks. Then comes a line that stops you cold. Sometimes we don't heal. We just learn how to hold the broken parts. Gently. You don't underline it. You just whisper it once and let it echo. You think about how much energy the world spends shouting. These books don't shout. They murmur. They invite. They build intimacy instead of urgency. That's a radical act in a culture obsessed with the next big thing. A quirky footnote from your mental archive surfaces. There's a library in Copenhagen that only loans out people you borrow a person from a misunderstood group and talk to them for 30 minutes. It's called the Human Library. And these underdog books, they're kind of like that. Human voices you would have missed if you weren't quiet long enough to hear them. You wonder how many voices you've ignored because they weren't loud. How many truths you've skimmed because the font wasn't bold. How much of you've overlooked for the same reasons. This book ends softly. No twist, no explosive conclusion. Just a sentence about the sound of oars against the lake. You. Close it and feel like you've left a cabin where someone let you sit by their fire for a few hours. You reach for another. Different author, similar vibe. This one's about a florist who only speaks to plants. You didn't know you needed to read about that, but turns out you did. It reminds you of your own quiet rituals, how you arrange your tea bags by mood, how you talk to your laundry when no one's watching. We're all weird. The good books know that. The best ones don't flinch from it. You're noticing a pattern now. Underdog books tend to deal in soft revolutions. They won't sell you a new life plan or 10x your mindset, but they'll give you a line or a character or a half page. Moment that stays lodged behind your heart for years, and when your world falls apart at 3 a.m. someday, you won't remember the chart from that motivational bestseller. You'll remember this book, the sound of water, the lonely florist, the sentence about holding broken parts. You rest it gently on the floor, like returning a baby bird to a nest. You make a mental note to recommend it to someone, but not on Instagram, not in a Goodreads review, just quietly. Maybe a text to one friend. Maybe you'll lend them your copy creases and all. That feels more right, because that's what these books do. They pass quietly from hand to hand, not viral, not explosive, just true. And sometimes truth whispered is stronger than truth shouted. Now your fingers drift toward the book with the fluorescent tabs, sticking out of every other page, the one you highlighted so aggressively that you basically rinked the entire thing. It's dog-eared, scribbled on, underlined twice in places you no longer remember underlining. You pick it up with a mix of guilt and reverence. This was that book, the one you read during your big personal development era. You know, the one lots of journaling, lots of late nights, possibly while wearing a hoodie and playing ambient music on loop. You open it. The smell hits you. Ink, paper, memory. Your eyes fall on a highlighted line. Your fear isn't special. Everyone has it. Sit with it anyway. Past you had underlined it, starred it, and circled it in an aggressive shade of neon. Orange presents you blinks. That line still works. There's something sacred about annotation. It's like sending messages to your future self. You spot a comment you wrote in the margins, all in caps. Yes, this is me. No context, no explanation. A time capsule of an emotional spike. You once believed this book would change everything. It didn't, but it changed something. It gave you vocabulary, framework, anchors. Even now, rereading it is like meeting a past version of yourself in a dimly lit diner at midnight. You're both tired, you're both trying. Fun historical detour. The act of annotating books dates back to at least the Middle Ages, when monks scribbled marginalia in illuminated manuscripts, sometimes to clarify, sometimes to complain. There's a surviving 9th century note that literally reads, "Oh, my hand." Scholars still argue whether medieval marginalia was a form of commentary, meditation, or simply an early version of subtweeting. You smirk. Past you would definitely have subtweeted your own thoughts. Another highlight jumps out. You do not need to be understood to be valid. You had that one on a sticky note for months. Maybe you still should. There's a rhythm to revisiting books like this. A tug of war between memory and distance. You recognize the chapters, the metaphors, the little linguistic tricks that once felt like revelations, but now they feel like reminders. Still important, but less shiny. You've internalized some of them, outgrown others. You flip to a section on boundaries, pages bristling with neon flags. You once read it while crying quietly on a lunch break, chewing a granola bar like it might save your soul. And now, years later, the sentences still sting, but the sting feels cleaner. Less like a wound, more like a scar being acknowledged. Then comes the fringe, triviated. You know, some book lovers use invisible ink to annotate books in libraries they don't own. Secret messages to future readers, never seen unless under a black light. A whole universe of whispered thought hiding in plain sight. You imagine a page glowing with invisible empathy. That's kind of beautiful. You find a folded piece of paper, tucked between chapters, a receipt, from a cafe you don't even remember visiting. The date makes you pause. That was the week everything changed. Job, relationship, haircut. You didn't plan it. You just cracked open a book and let your brain get completely reprogrammed in public over espresso. That's the thing about highlight addiction. It's not just about the words. It's about who you were when those words mattered most. Annotated. Books are like emotional, archaeological digs. You're not just reading anymore. You're remembering. Another chapter. This one's about decision-making, fatigue. You'd underlined, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. You still quote that, even if you sometimes ignore it. Reading it now, it feels like a nudge. A gentle push to prune your current overgrown life garden. The chapter ends with a quote that says, "You're allowed to become someone you would have admired 5 years ago." You underline it again, not because you forgot, because it deserves 2 layers. You close the book slowly, fingertips resting on the final highlighted section. You don't feel transformed, you feel affirmed. And maybe that's more powerful. These books don't just teach, they track. Every tab is a breadcrumb from a time you decided to care. Every highlight, a record of a tiny inner rebellion. You're not addicted to hypeness. You're addicted to the feeling of catching truth mid-sentence. And in that way, these books are journals in disguise. You place it beside you like a worn talisman. Tomorrow, you might flip back to a few doggy pages, or not. It doesn't matter. The real notes are already written inside you. You shift position. The blanket clings a little tighter now, as if the bed knows what's coming next. You reach for that shiny stackias, those books, the ones promising transformation in 7 steps or less. The self-help titans, the celebrity morning routines, the billionaire bedtime hacks, the how-to-win guides with fonts loud enough to scream through a fog of indecision. You pick one up. It feels confident, assertive, glossy pages, perfect margins, a bullet point personality in hardcover form. You open it, already anticipating judgment. The introduction starts with a question. What do you want from your life right now? And your brain immediately spirals into 37 tabs of existential dread. You flip forward. Surely there's a cheat sheet, a hack, a shortcut. Page 18 offers a productivity matrix. You start mentally sorting your entire week into colored quadrants. Suddenly, brushing your teeth feels like an act of supreme strategic intent, but halfway through, your eyes start to glaze. There's a fine line between motivation and mental whiplash. Still, you have to admire the optimism. These books believe in you, fiercely. They assume you have the discipline of a monk and the caffeine tolerance of a CEO. You do not. But it's sweet of them to pretend. One historical fact pops into your mind. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Published in 1936, was considered revolutionary not for what it said, but because it dared to say that people skills mattered more than raw intellect. Historians still argue whether that book helped shape modern business etiquette or just created a generation of charming manipulators. Either way, it's a legacy made of bullet points and bravado. You read on. This book insists you start waking up at 5 a.m., journaling by candlelight, taking cold showers, and avoiding carbs after sundown. You do none of those things. Not because you disagree, you just know yourself. If you wake up at 5, it's probably because your stomach remembered leftover cake, a footnote suggests. You meditate between emails. Cute. You can't even sit through a loading screen without switching apps. Then comes a quote from someone successful, a tech founder who microdoses kombucha or something. They claim gratitude rewired their brain. You try. You list 3 things in your head you're grateful for. One of them is your blanket. One is tea. One is that you don't have to finish this book in one sitting. Still, you keep reading because there's something oddly comforting about structure. A plan, even if you'll abandon it by Friday. These books tell you life is changeable, hackable, that your personality is a software update away from greatness. That's a seductive thought. Then, the fringe trivia hits. There's an actual term. Bibliotherapy dating back to the early 20th century. Doctors prescribed books to patients as emotional medicine. Yes, literal reading as a cure. No copay required. You wonder what book your current self would be prescribed. Probably something soft. Maybe something weird back in the book. It's urging you to visualize success. Picture your best self. That version of you that drinks enough water, answers texts on time, doesn't spiral after one awkward meeting. You try, it's blurry, but the outline is comforting. Maybe that's enough. Here's the thing, they're not all fluff. Some lines hit. One chapter mentions decision fatigue, and you feel seen. Another one reframes failure as data. Not disaster, not doom, just data. You like that. It softens the sting. You start seeing these books less as gurus and more like hype friends. Loud, maybe a bit extra, but they mean well. They just want you to try, and honestly, trying is underrated. There's a chapter on forgiveness, specially toward yourself. It tells you to stop measuring your life in undone lists and missed gym days, to measure it in attempts, in pauses, in the fact that you're still here, flipping pages, trying to grow, even now. That one sinks in. You close the book slowly. Let it rest on your chest. Maybe you won't wake up at 5 a.m. Maybe you won't become a millionaire by Tuesday. But maybe, just maybe, you'll remember that progress isn't linear. That it's okay to fail, and try again, and fail softer. And that, truly, is a better habit than any checklist could teach. Your hand hovers now over the stack that intimidates you most. Poetry, not because it's difficult, though sometimes it is, but because poetry doesn't ask for interpretation. It dares you to feel, and there's nowhere to hide. No filler, no subplot, just the raw nerve of emotion dressed in rhythm and line breaks. You crack the spine. The first poem is just 3 lines. It says something about rain, about waiting, about a name you never hear anymore. You close the book immediately, not because it's confusing, because it's too clear. You try again, another poem, this one longer, about a train ride and a missed call and a sandwich eaten on a park bench while trying not to cry. You've done that. Maybe not in those exact clothes, but close enough. You read it again, slower. The best poetry doesn't explain itself. It sits next to your feelings and nods. It says, yeah, that happened. Sometimes the metaphors are tight and clever. Sometimes they sprawl like ivy. But always, always, they feel ancient and new in the same breath. Here's your historical anchor, Sappho. Writing in ancient Greece over 2,500 years ago is often considered the mother of lyrical poetry. Only fragments of her work survive. Like You Burn Me, or I have not had one word from her. That's all we have, and it's still enough to hurt. Historians still argue whether Sappho wrote for private lovers or public performance. But no one doubts the sting of her minimalism. Poetry's power is that it asks very little in quantity hand. Everything in vulnerability. You flip forward. The next poem is about forgiveness, but not the big movie scene kind. Just ... washing someone's mug after a fight. That's it. That's the entire poem. And somehow that lands harder than any epic ballad. A note in the back mentions the poet. Wrote this collection in recovery. Recovery from what? They don't say. You suspect the answer is everything. Addiction, grief, bad decisions, loneliness. Twitter. You stumble on a poem where the poet asks their younger self to rest. No advice, just rest. You place your hand on the page. For a moment, it feels like a prayer, and then something add a list poem. Each line starts with you can ... and includes things like, you can love the person who hurt you and still walk away. You can laugh in your therapist's office and still be healing. You can write terrible poems and still be a poet. You add your own in your head. You can read this at 2:47 a.m. and still be worthy of mourning. Then comes a fringe fact. In 1967, poet Anne Sexton recorded her poems set to jazz music and released a full album. It's weird, it's haunting, it's exactly what you'd expect from a woman whose work walked a tightrope between confession and collapse. You smile, imagining your own life soundtracked by whispered stanzas and distant saxophones. The next page in the book is blank, not accidentally. It's intentional, a pause, a silence written into the structure. You feel it. That's the genius of poetry. Even the empty space speaks. You start to think about how often you skip the space between thoughts in your own life, how you rush from moment to moment, barely allowing breath, let alone silence. Poetry teaches you to wait, to savor, to let the meaning arrive, not chase it. One last poem catches your attention. It's about an orange, simple, juicy, no metaphor, just joy in citrus form. A reminder that poetry doesn't have to ache, it can delight. And sometimes that's just as radical. You close the book, gently, like returning something sacred. Poetry didn't give you answers tonight, it gave you presence. It invited you to pay attention, to emotion, to language, to the gaps. You lean back, exhale through your nose. Maybe tonight you won't solve anything, but you'll notice more, and that's a kind of change, too. You set the poetry aside like a glass artifact, carefully, as if the paper might melt and reach now for something stranger. Experimental books, books that don't behave, books that don't unfold linearly, that defy your expectations and mess with your sense of how a story should go. You know the ones. Mixed typography, shifting narrators, timelines that double back like snakes. Books where you flip to a new chapter and suddenly the margins disappear or the sentences run into each other like they're trying to escape the page. You open one. The first line isn't even a sentence, just a word, hanging alone, no context. Again, and you're off. This isn't a story you read. It's a room you wander. At first, you're disoriented. There's a character maybe, a theme possibly. Then a graph appears. Then a footnote argues with the author. Then a blank page asks you a question you can't answer. What did you forget on purpose? You blink hard. This isn't fun. Not exactly. It's artful discomfort. But you're awake now. In the best way. You remember House of Leaves, that cult classic that terrified readers by having text printed upside down, sideways, and in spirals. It wasn't a gimmick. It was form as message. A story about losing your mind, written like a maze you could actually get lost in. Historians, or rather, literary theorists, still argue whether it's horror, metafiction, or just madness pressed into paper. You flip another page. There's a recipe now, but it's not for food. It's a metaphorical instruction list for emotional boundaries. Step 1. Pick a plate that's heavy enough to hurt if you drop it. Step 4. Bake with someone else's silence. You laugh, or maybe wince. It's unclear. Another chapter begins as a list of objects left behind in a motel room. A bra, a broken toy, a note that says, "This isn't the end, but it might be." No explanation. You love it. These books resist easy closure. They often refuse catharsis, and yet somehow they feel more honest, because life doesn't always wrap up in 3 acts either. Sometimes you're just a tangle of narratives happening simultaneously, and these books reflect that you hit a page with nothing but a line drawn across it. And below it, this is the moment you crossed over. Crossed what? Into what? The author never says. And that's the beauty of it. Experimental books challenge not just how you read, but who you are while reading. You notice your instincts, your craving for structure, your discomfort with ambiguity. These books force you to confront that. They ask, why do you need it to make sense so badly? You close your eyes for a second. Think of how many moments in your life had no chapter title, no clear villain, no neat symbolism, just chaos, or maybe absurdity. And maybe these books, this wild, unruly genre, are the only ones brave enough to tell those stories. Then comes the fringe detail. Georges Perec, a French writer, once wrote an entire novel, La Disparition, without using the letter E. Not once. A literary lipogram. The English translation, avoid, replicated the feat. It's a book defined by what's missing. You can't help but wonder what personal stories you've avoided telling yourself the same way by removing crucial letters, facts, truths. You reach a page near the end. It's written in second persons, like this moment. The book is suddenly you, talking to you, from a version of you that never left that old apartment. It's eerie, but also comforting. You don't even realize you've stopped trying to follow the plot. You've surrendered. You're experiencing, not interpreting. That's the gift of these books. They break your brain just enough to get past your defenses. You close the book, or maybe it closes itself. You're not sure. And somehow you feel rearranged, not smarter, not better, just less certain, which is the first step toward real change. Because if your inner story can bend this way, if you can unlearn your love of tidy narratives, maybe there's room for more possibilities than you ever imagined. It's late nor maybe early, the kind of hour where everything feels soft around the edges. You shift under the blanket and reach for something with more bite. Memoirs, the real ones, the raw, first-person journeys that don't smooth out the wrinkles. These are books built from lived scars, shaky recoveries, slow reckonings, and you're ready. You open to a page already creased. The author is telling a story about their lowest points, sleeping in a car, pockets empty, convinced they'd failed permanently. They don't dramatize it. No swelling music, no philosophical detours. Just cold seats, condensation on windows, and hunger that sounds like metal in the mouth. You read in silence. Memoirs hit differently. They don't just share facts. They reveal selves. They ask, "Here's my story now. What are you hiding?" This author doesn't tell you what they learned right away. They let you sit in the muck with them. It's not until chapter 5 that they mention rebuilding. And even then, it's not a triumphant montage. It's ugly work. Small wins, learning to fold clothes again, returning library books, remembering how to laugh without guilt. You appreciate the slowness. You remember a historical memoir that changed everything. The Diary of Anne Frank. It wasn't meant to be a book. It was a teenage girl's attempt to make sense of an unthinkable world. Her words survived where entire cities didn't. Historians still argue whether her diary is political or personal, but they agree on one thing: its power came from her. Truth, unvarnished, brave. You turn the page. Now the author is writing about forgiveness. Not the poetic kind, but the reluctant, bitter, exhausted kind. The kind you do even when you don't want to, because holding on to the alternative is killing you. They describe what it was like to go back to therapy, to sit in a chair, arms crossed, saying, "I don't know what I'm supposed to say," and the therapist replying, "Start there." That hits you harder than any 10-step plan ever could. And then one of those quiet sucker punches a paragraph where they recount what they would say to their younger self. It's not deep advice, just this: you're not too much, and you're not enough. You're just a person. Keep going. You close your eyes for a second. Let that sink. Here comes the fringe gem. Frida Kahlo's diary, filled with watercolors, symbols, and personal notes, remained unpublished for decades. When it finally emerged, it wasn't just a peek into her art, it was a blueprint of survival, chronic pain, and the refusal to be small. A visual memoir of defiance and vulnerability. You look back at the book. This one doesn't have drawings, but it has voice. And you can tell it was written by someone who didn't know if they'd ever be heard and wrote anyway. Memoirs remind you that people survive, not always gracefully, not without damage, but they do. And sometimes the telling is the surviving. You read another chapter. This one's about their mother. It's awkward, complicated, tender in places, brittle in others. You think about your own version of that story, the family dynamics you keep half buried, even from yourself. Memoirs are sneaky like that. They get you to examine your reflection without even realizing it. The author admits to jealousy, 2 petty mistakes, 2 moments where they lied, even when they didn't need to. There's no moral payoff, just honesty, and that feels like oxygen. You start to notice that what you love most about this book isn't the transformation, it's the process. The honesty of not knowing, of writing mid-repair. It makes you feel less alone in your own unfinishedness. And here's the real trick. After reading a memoir, you start narrating your own life differently. That fight last week, chapter material. That walk through the park with too much on your mind, internal monologue. That silent ride in the elevator with someone you almost loved, a flashback scene. You don't need to write a memoir, but maybe you can live with the kind of attention a memoirist gives to their days. Detail, meaning, arc. You close the book and whisper, "Thank you," even though the author will never hear it, because tonight, someone's truth made room for yours. You feel a strange pull now, not toward words, but toward images. You reach for the illustrated books, the ones you keep hidden behind the serious titles, graphic novels, visual memoirs, the colorful ones that grown-ups aren't supposed to love so much, but you do. And tonight, unapologetically, you let yourself open one. The first page is a full splash of blue, no text, just sky. It breathes at you, a single bird in the corner. You stare longer than you expected. You flip, and suddenly you're in motion. A city spreads out like origami. A character, drawn in simple lines, sprints across rooftops. You feel the pace. Graphic. Novels don't ask for your time. They steal it in panels and color and silence. You used to think illustrated books were light reading. You were wrong. These books cut deeper, faster, without the cushioning of paragraphs. A single frame can punch harder than 3 chapters of prose. A quiet glance between 2 drawn figures. A wordless panel after a loss-it. All lands like truth you didn't see coming. The power of the visual isn't new. Remember the Bayeux tapestry, nearly 230 feet long, that embroidered graphic novel of the 11th century told the story of the Norman conquest without a single line of prose. Historians still argue whether it was meant as propaganda or commemoration, but no one denies its storytelling power. And here you are, centuries later, turning pages that do the same. This one's a memoir, sparse dialogue, a story told in muted tones, grey skies, slow walks, a family reunion so quiet it hurts. You don't just read it, you feel it. You fall into the white space between the frames and stay there, floating. Then comes the color shift. One panel bursts into bright yellow as the narrator recalls a childhood summer. You blink. It's like memory photobombing grief. No monologue needed, just color. That's the thing about graphic storytelling. It respects your intelligence. It lets you infer. It lets you feel before it explains. You remember something odd. There's a growing academic field called graphic medicine, where doctors use comics to explore illness, trauma, and care. True, one physician even draws comic strips about end-of-life care to help both patients and clinicians. You wonder how many truths people can finally say once they're allowed to draw them instead of speak them. You turn another page. There's a panel with a single tear. No sound effect, no caption, just that. It says everything. You stare at it too long, like it's accusing you of not crying lately. Now the story shifts. Panels get smaller, tighter, claustrophobic. You didn't notice it happening until your shoulders tensed. You laugh softly. How does a 2D layout manipulate your breathing like this? This story's about a sibling relationship, one lost to time, then found again awkwardly, like 2 puzzle pieces trying to fit after being chewed up by life. It's sad and beautiful, and more honest than most dinner conversations. You flip. The last page. A final panel of the 2 characters sitting on a bench, not speaking, just existing near each other. No hug, no redemption arc, just presence. You exhale. You didn't know how much you needed that. Graphic novels don't always change you with meaning. Sometimes they change you with pacing, with permission to pause. They teach you to read silence as clearly as dialogue, to respect a look, a shadow, a panel left intentionally empty. You place the book on your lap and stare at the cover again. It doesn't shout, but it says something big anyway. Maybe the lesson tonight is that your story doesn't have to be loud. To matter, it can be illustrated in quiet moments, split into panels, full of gaps and strange pacing. You don't have to narrate every emotion. You can just show up frame by imperfect frame. You let your eyes drift closed for a moment, and, for the first time tonight, the images stay with you longer than the words. Now comes the book that hums in your hands, the one you didn't expect to matter, but it does. It's about rituals, daily ones, seemingly boring ones, the kind of book people describe as meditative while sipping herbal tea and rearranging. They're throw blankets. You open it expecting fluff. You get clarity. The author opens by saying, "We do not rise to our goals. We fall to our systems." You stop reading, stare at the ceiling. That sentence is annoying. Because it's right. This book isn't about overhauls or grand transformations. It's about what you do at 6:12 a.m. before your brain comes online. What your feet touch first. Whether you check your phone or your breath. Whether you gulp coffee or drink water like a promise. It's the boring stuff. But you're starting to understand that's the real scaffolding of self. You remember a historical detail. The ancient Romans divided their days into tight, ritualized blocks. Even emperors started with diem salutary, the morning greeting ritual with friends and advisors. Historians still argue whether this was genuine community building or just strategic reputation maintenance. Either way, it worked. Systems shaped character. You read on. The book offers small rituals, not as prescriptions, but as possibilities. Light a candle when you write. Say a quiet thank you before meals even, if it's just takeout fries. Put your phone to bed before you put yourself to bed. Keep one corner of your home tidy, even if chaos rules the rest. They're small, gentle, almost laughably simple, but as you imagine them, your nervous system starts to unclench. You flip the page and find this gem. When you repeat something with care, it becomes sacred. Not because of magic, but because of intention. You start to think about your own weird little habits. The songs you hum while brushing your teeth. The way you line up your pens before writing. The way you check the lock twice. Those aren't quirks. Those are quiet survival spells. You remember something quirky, Japanese, Buddhist. Monks have practiced Shakyo for centuries, hand-copying sutras as a form of meditation. Line by line, brushstroke by brushstroke, not to be productive, but to be present. It's a ritual of attention, not achievement. You imagine what your version of Shakyu could be. Copying a quote, folding your laundry slowly, stirring soup while thinking kind thoughts. The idea feels ... possible. The book explains that rituals don't change outcomes, they change you. A morning walk won't erase your problems, but it might remind your body that you're not trapped. A bedtime stretch won't cure your sadness, but it might soften its edges. And here's the sneaky brilliance. When you honor small routines, you create pockets of predictability, islands of safety, anchors in the oceanic chaos of daily life. This doesn't mean controlling everything. It means trusting the rhythm and returning to it when you've drifted too far. One chapter compares rituals to a heartbeat. You don't notice it most of the time, but it's keeping you alive. Another shares a practice. Write a note to your future self every Sunday. Not goals, just a check-in. A whisper forward through time. You smile. That feels oddly comforting. The author doesn't preach. They admit to missing rituals, to resenting them, to restarting 100 times. You appreciate that. This isn't perfectionism disguised as self-help. It's life with a meat RONOME. You close the book. Your to-do list still exists. Your inbox still mocks you. But now you're holding a smaller truth. Maybe, just maybe, the life you want is already hidden inside the habits you're half keeping. Waiting, patient, repetitive, beautiful. You're down to the final book now. The spine is soft, the cover smudged where fingers have held it too often. This one's different. It's not about changing you in obvious ways. No frameworks, no diagrams, just stories, fiction, the imagined kind that somehow tells the truth better than anything real ever could. You open it, and the first sentence is already a lifeline. There was a town where people forgot how to be sad, so they sang instead. You don't know what that means, but your chest loosens. This story takes place in a nowhere village. The sky changes color depending on people's moods. There's a woman who bakes memories into bread, a boy who keeps trying to invent silence. You're disoriented, delighted, suspended. That's the thing about fiction, it lies on purpose so it can tell a deeper truth. It invents magic to explain pain. It gives us dragons so we can finally name our fears. It gives us fake wars to talk about real grief. And it gives us characters so flawed they loop back around to being holy. Read a chapter about a man who never speaks. Everyone thinks he's rude, but one day he builds a boat out of matchsticks and sails it into the desert. No explanation, just a paragraph that ends with, "He wasn't silent. He just spoke a different kind of loud." You sit with that. Here's your historical fact. In 1922, Ulysses by James Joyce was banned in the US for being obscene. Now, it's considered a cornerstone of modern literature. Historians still argue whether Joyce was a genius or just a very determined chaos agent with a typewriter and a lot of time. Either way, fiction survived. Always does. You keep reading. Now there's a story about a friendship that ends without explanation. Another about a ghost who forgets she's dead because people still talk about her so much. Each one feels like it's unzipping something in you. You reach a scene where two characters argue in a hallway. Nothing special, no weapons drawn. Just one person saying, "You forgot my favorite color," and the other whispering, "I didn't forget. I just got tired of saying it first." You feel your throat tighten. Fiction sneaks past your armor. That way, then comes a fringe literary tidbit. Italo Calvino once said, "A classic is a book that has never finished saying what it has to say." You wonder if that applies to people too. Maybe you're not done saying what you need to say. Maybe you're just learning how to say it in better stories. The book's final chapter is a page long. The character wakes up, makes tea, listens to the radio, then opens a window and thinks, "Maybe today I'll try again." That's it. That's the ending. No twist, no moral, just motion. You close the book and realize fiction hasn't changed. Your beliefs, it's softened them. It's reminded you that empathy isn't a philosophy. It's a practice. And it often starts with sitting quietly inside someone else's story. Even if that someone doesn't exist. You look around your room. Same walls, same ceiling fan, same stack of unread emails, but you feel different, just slightly. Like maybe the air inside you has been restructured. You lie back, the cover of the book resting on your chest. The story is over, but something in you feels freshly written, and now it's time to sleep. And so you breathe slower now. You let the echoes of these stories settle like dust on old wooden floors. No need to chase conclusions. No need to summarize or solve. Let the words you've held tonight drift back into the shelves of your memory. They're still there, tucked between your thoughts, glowing faintly, like bookmarks left in the pages of your soul. Feel the quiet now, the way your body sinks deeper into the bed, the way the air wraps around your shoulders like a shawl made of soft night. Let your limbs grow heavier. Let your thoughts untie themselves from today. Maybe, by morning, nothing will have changed. And yet everything might feel slightly more possible, slightly more yours. Let your breath find its rhythm again. In, out. No rush. There is nothing left to do, no lesson to apply. Just this moment, this warmth, this hush. The world will still spin without you solving it. And maybe the only change you really need tonight is rest. So here you are, floating now in silence, a character between chapters. The lights are low, the story sleeps with you. You've seen transformation through every lens. Tonight habit loops, quiet grief, unhinged fonts. But now it's time to slip into something older. Not older in tone, but in scope. You reach for philosophy. Yeah, that shelf. The one you usually ignore unless you're in an I think therefore I overthink kind of mood. The book you pick is thinner than you remember, but heavier. It feels like someone condensed 10,000 years of thinking into 200 pages of shoulder shrugs and existential side. You crack it open and immediately trip into a sentence like, "Man is condemned to be free." You sit back, take a breath. Right. This kind of book doesn't ease in it shoves. The philosopher on this page is Sartre, moody and unapologetic. Freedom, he argues, isn't a gift. It's a burden. You get to choose everything, but you also have to own every consequence. No one else to blame. No predestined plotline. Just you and your trembling finger on the cosmic next button. Suddenly, your afternoon cereal choices feel ... loaded. You keep reading. Philosophy books aren't linear reads. They're more like walking into a room where brilliant people are arguing, and you're there to quietly sip tea and panic about your place in the cosmos. But once you settle into the rhythm, it's addictive. The beauty of this genre isn't answers, it's questions. Unsettling, brilliant questions that get lodged behind your ribs. Here's one. What does it mean to live a good life? You stare at it, then you instinctively glance at your phone, as if Twitter might have an answer. Spoiler, it doesn't. You remember something curious. Ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes once lived in a barrel, insulted Plato in public, and carried a lamp around Athens, looking for an honest man. Historians still argue whether he was a proto-minimalist, an early performance artist, or just deeply committed to trolling. Either way, his whole vibe was, question everything loudly, preferably shirtless. You smile. You like your philosophers unhinged. Another page. Now it's the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus. People who believed that suffering isn't optional, but how you respond to it is. It's almost annoying how applicable this stuff still is. One line reads, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." You nod, then immediately start worrying about outside events. But hey, it's a process. Philosophy doesn't change you overnight. It rewires you slowly. You start noticing your inner narrator, how you label things, good or bad, instantly, reflexively. These thinkers suggest dropping the labels. Just say, "This happened," and then breathe. You turn to a newer philosopher now. A modern voice, less robes and marble busts, more tattoos and cafe metaphors. They argue that identity isn't fixed, that the you reading this book isn't the same you who began it. That's not metaphysics. That's just Tuesday. They write, to grow is to die in small, invisible ways every day. You underline that twice. Then the weird trivia hits. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once built a house for his sister, so obsessively precise that he reportedly insisted on lowering a ceiling by 30 millimeters because it felt wrong. Philosophy, but make it interior design. You imagine reading Hegel while adjusting light fixtures. Classic Wittgenstein. You're almost done with the chapter now. The book isn't telling you how to change, it's showing you how to think about change, which honestly might be more valuable, because at 3:11 a.m., what you need isn't another checklist. It's a reminder that your confusion is legitimate, your questions are worthy, and your contradictions are part of the deal. You close the book slowly. It doesn't feel finished. It's not supposed to. Philosophy doesn't tie bows. It untangles knots, and sometimes, when you're lost, that's the kind of map you need.